Okay, I want you to imagine something. It's suburban St. Louis, Missouri, the morning of July 12th, 1973. It's already hot, it's humid, and the air is just thick with this acrid smell of smoke.
Not just any smoke, it's the smell of history burning.
Exactly. What you're witnessing is, well, it's one of the single most destructive archival disasters in American history, even now, half a century later.
It's hard to overstate the scale. We're talking about a fire that just consumed somewhere between 16 and 18 million official U.S. military personnel records.
18 million.
Like, that number is so big it's hard to grasp. So let's break it down. For the Army alone, that fire wiped out 80% of all their files for a nearly 50-year span.
50 years, from 1912 all the way up to 1960.
Right. So you've got World War I, you've got World War II, the Korean War, just gone. And the building where this happened was the National Personnel Records Center, the NPRC. It was supposed to be the central secure hub for every military service record in the country.
By 73, it was holding, what, over 52 million files?
52 million. So the loss wasn't just, some files in a building. It fundamentally erased the primary evidence that veterans and their families needed for everything.
Benefits, pensions, VA healthcare.
Even just proofs of their sacrifice.
So our mission today, it's not just to retell the story of the fire. We really want to get into the devastating, ongoing human impact. And we're going to trace the lessons, or maybe the lack of lessons, that the government learned about protecting our history.
And we're going to connect this accidental fire to the much darker world of deliberate document destruction, and then bring it all the way to today, to modern data negligence.
Because the fragility of memory, whether it's on paper or on a hard drive, that seems to be a constant theme here.
Exactly. We're doing a deep dive into the culture of record keeping and maybe record losing. That really defines how history is saved or destroyed in the United States.
Okay, let's unpack this. We'll start back in 1973.
Yes.
So this National Personnel Records Center building in St. Louis, it wasn't some dusty old warehouse. It was purpose-built, a 6-story federal complex.
Brand new in 1956, built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And it was not cheap. It cost $12.5 million back then.
Which today is, what, something like $144.5 million?
About that, yeah. So this was supposed to be the state-of-the-art facility.
Yeah.
Designed specifically to protect these irreplaceable documents.
And that's where the whole story just gets unbelievable.
It is, because despite all that money, despite the mission, the building had these fundamental architectural flaws. I mean, it was a disaster just waiting to happen.
What kind of flaws are we talking about?
Well, the design was a vast open floor plan, for efficiency. It was cheaper, about $10 a square foot, which was pretty economical. But it meant there were no internal fire barriers.
So it's just one giant open space?
One giant open space filled with paper. The design meant that once a fire started, air could just flow completely freely.
You're basically building a giant chimney.
Precisely. And the 6th floor, that's where the fire started, and it was just packed. The records were in these cardboard boxes, totally full, crammed tight on steel shelves.
So you have the perfect fuel, all that paper. You have the perfect air supply.
And the worst possible setup.
So wait a minute. This building, purpose-built, $144 million in today's money, for irreplaceable documents. It had 0 sprinklers. How does that even happen?
It sounds insane now, but it seems to be a combination of factors.
Yeah.
The main one was this early Cold War belief in, fireproof modern construction.
The idea that concrete and steel just don't burn.
Right. Archival standards were, let's say, less strict than they are today. Management really believed that because the building itself was made of concrete and steel, it was inherently fire resistant.
But they completely forgot about what was inside the building.
They failed to account for the fuel load, the sheer volume of paper inside that concrete shell. So you had a building that couldn't burn down, but it could act as a perfect oven to incinerate 18 million documents.
That lack of sprinklers just let it run wild.
Uncontrollably. Which, brings us to the nightmare for the first responders.
Yeah.
Let's look at that timeline. The first call comes in just after midnight, 12:16 a.m. on July 12th. It's a dispatcher, but it's immediately backed up by a security guard who got a report from a passing motorcyclist.
So it's confirmed fast. And the fire trucks arrive quickly.
Very. By 12:20 a.m., they're on the scene. That's a rapid response. But it didn't matter.
The fire was already too far gone.
Exactly. The heat and the smoke were so severe that within just 3 hours, by 3:15 a.m., all the firefighters were forced to pull out of the building.
They had to retreat.
A full retreat. They had to switch to fighting it completely from the outside. And this is where the tragedy just locks in. The fire burned, completely out of control, for 22 hours straight.
22 hours. And the effort to fight it was massive.
Monumental. You had, I think, 42 or 43 different fire departments and districts all rushing to St. Louis to help out.
I mean, just think about coordinating that in 1973. Almost 4 dozen different agencies trying to fight one fire.
And the equipment was just being pushed past its absolute limit. It was a war, and it was a long one. They couldn't officially declare the fire out until the morning of July 16th.
That's 4 days after it started.
4 days. And even then, crews were on site suppressing flare-ups, rekindling until the end of the month. And they were just plagued by these logistical failures.
Like the water pressure. I read they kept calling the water company, begging them to boost the pressure to the hydrants.
It was a constant problem. And it slowed everything down. And the machines. The machines themselves started to fail. One of the pumper trucks just broke down after running for 40 hours straight.
Unbelievable.
And what's really fascinating here, in a grim way, is the dual destruction. It wasn't just the fire.
Right. It was the water.
The massive effort to put the fire out created an equally catastrophic problem. We're talking about almost 90,000 cubic feet of documents, just soaking wet, sitting in pools of water.
So you've got this mess of burned history and soggy history all mixed together.
In the middle of a St. Louis summer, high heat, high humidity is the perfect environment for mold. So even the records that survived the flames were now at risk of being lost to, biological decays, a race against time.
Yeah.
So we move from the chaos of the fire itself to the actual cost. The final tally is between 16 and 18 million official military records utterly destroyed.
And the loss wasn't spread out evenly, which is one of the cruelest parts of this.
No, it was incredibly disproportionate. It took out about 80% of the Army's records for anyone discharged between November 1912 and January 1960.
Just think about that. That's the entire archival history for the vast majority of our World War I, World War II, and Korean War veterans. It's just gone.
The Air Force was hit just as hard. 75% of their files were lost for personnel discharged between 47 and 64.
But with the Air Force, it's even more specific and almost random.
It is deeply frustrating. The loss specifically hit veterans whose last names were alphabetized from Hubbard through Z.
Why? Why that specific range?
It just speaks to the kind of chaotic nature of archival storage at the time. It was likely a block of records that had just been transferred or was being prepped for storage, and it just happened to be on the 6th floor.
So if your last name was, say, Adams, your record might be fine. But if it was Williams...
Your history was almost certainly ash. That randomness just makes the disaster feel even more pointed.
Now, thankfully, most Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard files were spared. They were stored elsewhere in the building.
Mostly, yes. But they weren't totally safe. Any records from those branches that were actively being worked on, pulled for request, being reviewed by staff, if they were on the 6th floor when the fire hit, they were lost too.
And that included a security vault on that floor.
It did. And some of the high-profile files lost in that vault were pretty notable. People like the Greek Prime Minister Andreas Papandreou and, this is a strange one, Adolf Hitler's nephew, William Patrick Hitler.
Wait, Hitler's nephew served in the U.S. Navy?
He did during World War II, and his file was in that vault. It's a bizarre, grim little historical footnote.
But here's the fact that just turns this from a terrible accident into a multi-generational catastrophe. Not a single one of those destroyed records had a backup.
No duplicate copy, no microfilm, certainly no digital version.
Yeah.
This was it. They were the sole custodians of this history.
And to make it worse, they didn't even have a complete index of what was lost.
Which is just a staggering failure of management. To be responsible for 52 million records and not know exactly what you have.
Yeah.
It's almost as bad as the fire itself. They often didn't know a file was gone until a veteran or a family member asked for it.
So what does this actually mean for people today? I mean, for you, our listener, the impact is still very real.
It's profound, and it's practical. Veterans and their families need these files. They're called Official Military Personnel Files, or OMPFs. That file is the single most important document a veteran has.
It's the key to everything.
It is. The OMPF has it all. Your entry and discharge dates, unit assignments, your rank, all your medical records, especially the ones linking an injury to combat.
Awards verification.
Everything you need for benefits, for VA healthcare, for burial in a national cemetery. Without that file, the whole process becomes a nightmare.
It just creates these heartbreaking administrative walls decades after the service. I mean, historians and genealogists hit these dead ends all the time, but it's the practical impact that's so tough.
Right. It hinders verifying awards. A family trying to get a Purple Heart for a relative long after they've passed. If the records are gone, It might be impossible.
And we see that in the anecdotes, the emotional toll. We read about one family who spent years trying to find proof of a bronze star their ancestor said he'd earned. And the answer was always the same. Records likely destroyed in the 1973 fire.
Imagine earning that,
Right.
sacrificing for it, and then having the proof just wiped out by a paperwork fire decades later.
That feels like the real injustice. There was another story, a 91-year-old World War II vet. He was injured the day after D-Day. His family was trying to get his injuries recognized for a Purple Heart.
And the NPRC told them the two key documents they needed were lost in the fire. He passed away without that full recognition.
It's so sad, and it's why you see this culture of self-preservation among veterans.
Yes, one Vietnam vet talked about it. He said he learned a trick from older guys.
Yeah.
Before you get out, go into your service file, your 201 file, and you make copies of everything, your orders, your medals. You keep them forever.
He called it doing your homework.
Doing your homework, because you just couldn't trust the federal bureaucracy to not lose it. And, well, they were right.
So given the absolute scale of this mess, millions of files gone, millions more soaking wet, that immediate aftermath must have been just an incredible, frantic effort.
It was an all-hands-on-deck archival emergency.
Yeah.
First, they had to get the records out. They were using these makeshift ramps in really dangerous conditions.
And they had to move fast because of the mold risk.
Immediately, they set up this temporary tent city right there on the grounds to hold the documents while they scrambled for a solution.
And this is where the story takes a turn. The ingenuity they came up with was, well, it was groundbreaking.
Genuinely groundbreaking. They started treating the water-damaged records with a thymol solution to stop the mold. But the real game changer came from a neighbor.
McDonnell Douglas, the aircraft company.
Right. That plant had these enormous vacuum chambers that were originally built and used for the Apollo space program.
That is just wild. To test hardware for space.
Exactly. And the staff at the Record Center realized they could repurpose them. They could use these giant chambers for a kind of mass freeze drying of paper.
So the same tech that helped get us to the moon was now being used to save scorched military records in St. Louis.
It's an amazing bit of ingenuity. It was the first ever mass drying treatment of paper records in a vacuum. And it was incredibly effective. They were pulling out about 8 tons of water per session.
8 tons?
It saved countless documents, and really it set the global standard for how to respond to this kind of disaster.
And there was another smaller innovation that we still see today, the plastic milk crates.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it was brilliant. The staff started using plastic milk crates to move the wet documents. They were sturdy, they allowed for air circulation, and they didn't tear the soggy paper. It's still a standard practice in archives today during floods.
And that recovery mission, unbelievably, is still going on.
It is. The NPRC has a specialized preservation lab. The woman who used to run it, Marta O'Neill, she described it as being like an MASH unit, a mobile army surgical hospital for documents.
So what are they doing in there now?
They're using a lot of technology. Even today, they're still recovering information from charred and water-damaged files. They can use infrared cameras, for example, to read blackened paper that's totally illegible to the naked eye.
How does that work?
The carbon residue from the fire responds differently to infrared light than the original ink. So sometimes they can photograph it and actually reconstruct the original text.
That's incredible, but what happens when a file is just bash, when there's nothing left to restore?
That's when they have to become historical detectives. They use what they call the auxiliary records approach. They hunt for alternative sources.
What kind of sources are we talking about?
Anything that might confirm service details. So things like old unit rosters, hostile admission records, mourning reports from a company, even pay vouchers, documents that were filed separately and survived the fire.
And with those, they can piece together the basics.
The absolute basics. Entry and discharge dates, final rank, character of service. It's not the whole story, but it's often just enough for a family to get access to VA benefits.
It's just this painstaking work building a history piece by missing piece.
It is. They recovered about 6.5 million records from the fire, and those are now safe. But the challenge of trying to reconstruct the details for the 16 to 18 million that were destroyed, that mission never really ends.
So the story of the NPRC fire is, it's really a story of human ingenuity fighting against an accidental disaster. You know, a failure of engineering, yes, but a disaster that was met with incredible dedication.
It really highlights the accidental fragility of our history.
Yeah.
But if we pull back and look at the bigger picture, 1973 is an absolute flashpoint year for government records.
How so?
Well, the NPRC fire shows us how vulnerable physical records are to an accident. But in that exact same year, 1973, there was also a shocking, deliberate destruction of government records.
So this forces us to look at how history disappears not by fire, but by an order.
By fiat.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we are, of course, talking about Project MKUltra.
The CIA's illegal human experimentation program. It ran from 1953 to 1973. This is one of the darkest chapters, and it's a perfect example of intentional historical erasure.
The whole scope of MKUltra was just morally horrifying. The stated goal was to develop drugs and procedures for mind control, to create a truth serum to use on Soviet spies.
And their methods were extreme.
Very. We're talking electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation. The documents also show evidence of verbal and sexual abuse, essentially psychological torture.
But the thing it's most famous for is the drug testing, specifically LSD.
Right. The CIA was obsessed with LSD. The director of MKUltra, Sidney Gottlieb, he actually arranged for the agency to buy the entire world supply of LSD from Sandoz Labs in the early 50s.
The entire world supply.
For $240,000.
Yeah.
Which is over $4 million today. They were desperate to see if they could use it to force defections or, wipe memories.
And they weren't just testing on spies, they were testing on American citizens.
On U.S. and Canadian citizens, often completely unwittingly. The testing happened at over 80 different institutions. Colleges, hospitals, prisons. They targeted people they thought were disposable.
Who were the subjects?
Mental patients. One man was given LSD for 174 days straight. Prisoners, drug addicts, prostitutes, people whose claims of abuse they figured would be easily dismissed.
And they even tested on their own people.
Oh, yes. There was a program called Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA set up these brothels in San Francisco safe houses. They'd lure men in, dose them with LSD without their knowledge, and then film them through one-way mirrors.
That is just unbelievable.
It gets stranger. Some of the unwitting subjects later became huge figures in the counterculture. Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he volunteered for what he thought was a university study. Same with the poet Allen Ginsberg.
So the CIA's secret mind control experiments accidentally helped kickstart the hippie movement.
In a very real, very ironic way, yes. But the personal cost was immense. The most famous case is probably Frank Olson.
He was an army biochemist.
Right, a biological weapons researcher. In 1953, his CIA supervisor secretly dosed him with LSD at a work retreat. 9 days later, he fell out of a 13th-story hotel window in New York. The official story was suicide triggered by a psychotic break.
But his family never believed that.
They fought for decades. Eventually, in 1975, they got a settlement of $750,000 and a formal apology from President Ford and the CIA director. But, and this is key, the apology was very narrow. It was only for the lack of informed consent, not for the whole program or the suspicious circumstances of his death.
They were carefully limiting the government's liability.
Exactly. And the reason it was so hard to prove anything brings us right back to our theme. The CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, ordered all MKUltra files destroyed in 1973.
The same year as the NPRC fire?
The exact same year. It was a deliberate mass shredding designed to completely erase the program from history and stop any future investigation.
So in St. Louis, millions of veteran records are accidentally burning, and in Washington, thousands of records of illegal experiments are being intentionally shredded.
In both cases, the history just vanished. And that shredding made the later investigations by the Church and Rockefeller commissions incredibly difficult.
So how do we know what we know? How did any documents survive?
Pure bureaucratic incompetence. A small cache of about 20,000 documents survived because they were misfiled, they were accidentally stored in a financial records building, so they missed the purge order. And they only came to light years later, in 1977, because of a Freedom of Information Act request. It's a powerful lesson. Sometimes, an accident is the only thing that can save history from policy. Okay, so we've established that paper records are incredibly fragile. They can burn by accident, or they can be shredded on purpose. The hope, I think, for a lot of us was that the digital revolution would solve this.
Right. Digital records, backups, encryption, they should be safer than cardboard boxes full of paper.
You would think so. But the evidence suggests that the same culture of record neglect it carried right over into the digital age. This was all laid bare in a 2009 congressional hearing that was focused specifically on NRA, the National Archives, and their problems with electronic records.
And NRA is the parent agency of the NPRC in St. Louis.
Correct. The 2009 hearing revealed Just some astonishing security failures. The move from paper to hard drives just created all new ways for them to be vulnerable.
And we should probably clarify for our listener, when we say they were losing records, they were losing PII, personally identifiable information.
The keys to the kingdom. Social security numbers, dates of birth, financial data, the stuff you need for identity theft. And the first big failure they talked about involved the Clinton administration's records.
What happened there?
A single 2-terabyte external hard drive just went missing from an NRI facility. And this drive had the PII for hundreds of thousands of White House staff, visitors, even job applicants.
How does a 2-terabyte hard drive just vanish from a secure government facility?
Well, the Inspector General testified that the drive was kept in an unsecured location, accessible by many employees.
So a total failure of basic physical security.
A complete failure. NRI had to start mailing out breach notification letters. They sent 26,000 at first and expected to send another 120,000. And at the time of the hearing, the drive was still missing.
Unbelievable. But the story that really connects back to the 1973 fire involved another defective hard drive. This one was from the Military Records Center in St. Louis.
Right. From the system they use to track requests. This is just a textbook case of mismanagement. The drive had the PII for millions of veterans on it. When it failed, NARI sent it out to a contractor to be repaired or scrapped.
Without wiping the data first.
Without wiping the data. The Inspector General was emphatic about this. He said NARA violated its own policy. The drive left their control, went through a food chain of up to 4 different contractors, and ended up at a scrap company, all while potentially readable.
Can you explain for us, what's the difference between just deleting a file and properly wiping a drive?
It's a critical difference. When you hit delete, you're just removing the pointer to the data. The data itself, the PII, is still physically on the disk until new data overwrites it, which could take years.
So it's recoverable.
Easily recoverable. To wipe or scrub a drive, you have to use special software to overwrite every single part of the disk multiple times with random data. Or you degauss it, which uses a powerful magnet to completely destroy the data.
And NARA did none of that.
None of it. They just shipped a drive with millions of veterans' personal information across the country. An expert testified at the hearing that the data was absolutely recoverable, quote, unless the media containing the data is utterly destroyed.
So the Inspector General really put the blame on management.
He laid it squarely on leadership. He called it a culture of blatant disregard. He said they had the security policies, they just weren't enforcing them. They had no real strategy for identifying and mitigating risk.
And this wasn't just about loose hard drives, was it? It was also about their big, expensive IT project.
The Electronic Records Archives, or ERA. This was supposed to be their answer to the digital age. The project to prevent a digital version of the 1973 fire. The price tag was over $500 million.
$550 million.
And yet, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, testified that the project was a mess. It was late, it was over budget by $20 million, and it wasn't delivering what was promised.
So what did they do?
They had to scramble and use a totally separate, off-the-shelf system to archive the Bush administration's electronic records. So now they had 2 parallel, incompatible systems.
Which just increases the risk of data loss.
Massively. The GAO warned that the delays were putting historical electronic records at risk of permanent loss. So the core problem, whether it's a paper fire in '73 or a long hard drive in '09, it was exactly the same.
A failure of management and internal controls.
It seems the technology changes, but the vulnerability, that culture of neglect, remains terrifyingly constant.
So we've come a long way. We've navigated the ashes of 1973, where 16 to 18 million military records were just annihilated. We saw the dark parallel of deliberate shredding with Project MKultra, how easily history can vanish by executive order.
And then we saw the dizzying failures of modern digital security, the missing hard drives, the unwiped data. Shows a continuous pattern of massive, avoidable loss that just keeps repeating itself.
The constant, chilling theme through it all is the fragility of memory, whether that memory is stored on paper that turns to ash or on a hard drive that gets sent off to a scrapyard.
Right. The security of our national history seems to rely entirely on the diligence of its custodians.
Yeah.
And that diligence, as we've seen, is often just tragically lacking.
So what's the takeaway here?
I think it raises a really important question for you, the individual listening to this today. Given the destruction of millions of physical records in 1973, and given the demonstrated vulnerability of massive digital records today, thanks to this culture of blatant disregard, how secure is any history that relies solely on a single government custodian? What responsibility do we have as individuals to safeguard our own vital documents? Like a DD-214, should we be making our own copies, just like those veterans learned to do decades ago? Because given this continuous pattern of massive loss, both accidental and intentional, maybe true historical preservation has to start at home.